When I was a kid, something happened in our neighborhood that still bothers me, even now, decades later. It was the kind of thing you only think happens in movies, until it happens right next to you. It started when a little girl went missing. She was about 10, an only child. We didn't know her very well, but she lived just a couple streets from us. Her mother, I never forget the look on her face. She'd walk up and down the streets for days, calling out her daughter's name, begging for help, putting up posters on every lamp, post and bulletin board. Her voice got more cracked and desperate as the days went on. Still, weeks went by, and then months, without any news or trace. And when Halloween rolled around that year, everything felt wrong. Normally, Halloween was a big deal in our neighborhood. Kids would run around unsupervised. Parents would chat on porches with warm drinks, and you'd hear our laughter all night. But that year, everyone was on edge, and no kid was allowed to trick or treat alone. I was lucky. My cousin lived just a few blocks away, and since both my parents had to work that night, I stayed at his place. His mom, my aunt, gathered a group of 9 neighborhood kids and took us out trick or treating as a group. We were excited at first. Safety in numbers, right? We went house to house, yelling, "Trick or treat!" like we had every year. All of us were around the same age, and we all knew each other from school, so most of our costumes were something of superheroes or anime characters. You know, whatever was popular that year. But somewhere along the way, a new kid joined us. That was when things got weird. I didn't notice him at first. I didn't notice him at first. None of us really did. One moment we were a group of 9, the next we were 10. The extra kid was something strange for a costume. Not scary per se, just different. He had on an oversized hoodie, baggy pants that didn't fit right, and a sort of mask, like a burlap sack with holes cut out for eyes. Kind of like a homemade scarecrow. Dirty, worn out. Nothing like the fun store-bought stuff the rest of us had. What stuck with me was that no one else seemed to notice him, like really notice him. He didn't talk or ask for candy. He just walked with us, and I assumed he was someone's cousin or sibling, maybe just a little timid. But the longer he stuck around, the more I felt this pit in my stomach, like something was really off about him. Hours went by, we filled our bags. My aunt was always nearby, chatting with neighbors and keeping an eye on us. And then, at one point, we stopped. My cousin and I were waiting by the sidewalk while my aunt struck up a conversation with someone she knew. And that's when the bag mask kid turned towards us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small hunting knife, and it all happened so fast. He lunged at my cousin and started stabbing, wildly, like he didn't even know what he was doing. My cousin screamed and tried to pull away, and I somehow managed to push the attacker off before he could do any serious damage. My aunt rushed over screaming. Neighbors came running, and the kid just stood there. He didn't run, he didn't try to leave, he just stood there, watching and breathing heavily like an animal. Someone tore the mask off his head, and we were all shocked. The attacker wasn't a boy like we thought. It was a girl. She was pale, filthy, and her eyes were sunken, black like a doll's. That's when the cops were called, and things got even weirder, because that girl The one who tried to stab my cousin was the same girl who had gone missing a few months prior. She didn't say much, or hardly anything. She didn't cry, or try to explain why she did it. Didn't even seem to register the gravity of her actions. It was like the part of the brain that calculates consequences was missing in hers. People speculated. Some said she'd been kidnapped and brainwashed. Others believed she had escaped some kind of abuse. What chilled me to the bone was something I remembered earlier during our night of trick or treating, because I remember seeing a man wearing a similar hoodie in the distance with a mask and watching us after she joined. He never said anything to us or our aunt, and I didn't see him interact with the other adults either. Police tried to track him down, but they had no leads or suspect, and the girl was taken into protective custody, and slowly the town went quiet again. But here's the part that made my stomach turn years later. I went to visit my parents not long ago, and somehow the subject came up. My aunt, the same one who had taken us out that night, told me something I hadn't heard before. Apparently, the girl, now a grown woman in her 30s, recently filed a lawsuit against her mother, not a random man, not some kidnapper, her own mother and stepfather. She claimed she was never kidnapped. She said she had been locked in the basement when she was a kid, that they faked her disappearance to cover it up, and that she escaped on Halloween and tried to blend in with the crowds. That was the year she found us. That was the year she found us, and that was the night she tried to kill my cousin, and none of us knew why. No one's sure if her story is even true. The case is still in process, but my aunt, she believes her, and honestly, so do I. I still remember the mask, the bag over her head, and I wonder if she wore it to hide from someone, or if someone made her wear it, for years maybe. A part of me also wonders if she stabbed my cousin because she wanted to, or is it so she could get the police called and force them to investigate? Either way, that was the last Halloween I ever enjoyed. I had just graduated and freshly joined the workplace. I was living alone, newly independent, and feeling the weight of being in a new town where I had no one. But even though I mostly kept to myself and had no friends or even acquaintances, I somehow managed to find myself a stalker, or rather, he found me. It started with small, random cryptic messages that made no sense, then pictures sent to me in the middle of the night, showing places I usually frequent. At first, I thought it was just someone pulling a weird prank, but it didn't stop. It just kept on going for weeks, this odd, creeping sense that someone was always watching me. Then Halloween came around, and despite my usual reluctance to go out, my favorite coworker, someone I'd actually clicked with at work, invited me to a party. She wasn't exactly the social butterfly type either, and practically begged me to come with her. I figured I could use the distraction, and maybe it would be nice to make some new friends. The party was better than I expected. I wasn't sure I'd have fun, but I did. And towards the night we're on, we split up, and I found myself alone in a room full of strangers. And that's when he walked up to me, the man in the Joker costume. Yeah, I know, a bit cliche, but we started chatting, and surprisingly, we hit it off. But as the conversation went on, I began to feel uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then it happened. My stalker started texting me again after a few days of silence, sending my nerves into overdrive. Rick, my Joker costumed date, must have sensed my discomfort because when I suggested heading back to my place, he didn't hesitate. We dropped my coworker off first. She was barely able to stand, drunk off her mind, and then we made our way to my apartment. But as soon we walked in, everything felt off. The air was thick, like something had been lingering there. There was a smell I couldn't place, and the lights, the ones I always left on to avoid total darkness, were out. I never turned them off. I always had them on. Rick must have noticed my anxiety because instead of brushing it off, he immediately sprang into action. He checked the closets, behind the doors, the bathroom, everywhere. I stayed in the living room, trying to shake off this eerie feeling. But then I heard it. There was a loud crash, followed by shouting. I rushed to the room and froze, and there was Rick, on the floor, clutching his stomach, blood seeping between his fingers, and standing over him was a man in a mask, the mask from the Halloween movies. Without a word, he jumped out of the window, 2 stories down, and it didn't kill him, but the fall left him limping away into the night. Rick was hurt, but it could have been much worse. We managed to get an ambulance and call the police, and as they arrived, they reviewed my security footage, and that's when things took a chilling turn. The man who attacked Rick, he had been to my apartment before, days earlier, when I was at work. The footage showed him walking through my front door, sitting on my couch, and leaving, like he was already planning to come back. And even more disturbingly, he wore the same mask, the same one I'd seen that night, standing at the end of the alley just before I left for the party. He didn't take anything, not even a single possession, as if he had no intention of robbing me. It was as if he was waiting for the right moment to do much worse. The police couldn't catch him. He disappeared like a ghost, leaving nothing but fear behind. I moved out of the apartment soon after. I changed my routine, took different routes to work, and I never went anywhere alone at night. It's been years now, and I haven't heard from my stalker since. Rick and I are still together. He saved me that night, and we've been inseparable ever since. We're even engaged now. Oh, and Rick? He works out now, not just for himself, but so he can protect me better and not get stabbed next time. When I was 8 years old, Halloween was everything to me and my 2 best friends, Ava and Em. We lived in a quiet, gated neighborhood, the kind of place where parents felt safe letting kids roam around on bikes or skateboards until the porch lights came on. This one Halloween, everything started normal. We dressed up, went trick or treating, filled our bags with candy, and were just messing around on our boards, rolling down the streets like we always did. There's this house near the first turn at the end of our street. It used to be beautiful, big 2 story, with this wide bay window on the second floor. The family that lived there moved out months ago. Nothing tragic, just relocated. But after they left, the place started going downhill. Windows were broken, there was graffiti, the lawn overgrown, and rumor had it that some teenagers broke in a few times. We didn't really know what was going on back then, just that something was off about it. Anyway, that night we were skating past it when Ava slowed down and pointed. There was a light, faint but definitely there, flickering in the upper window. We froze, all 3 of us. No one lived there. No one should be up there. Now, Ava's family was super spiritual, the kind of people who burned sage when someone got sick and talked about energy and spirits like it was a fact. So, of course, she immediately went full on, it's a ghost. We need to check it out. And yeah, it was Halloween, so our brains were more in Damon Salvatore might be up there mood than this is how people die in real life mode. Which now that I'm older, I can't tell which one would be worse. Anyways, that night, long after our sugar rushes crashed and our parents went to sleep, the three of us decided to sneak out. It was tradition for Ava and Em to sleep over every Halloween, so we didn't think much of it. We grabbed our boards, snuck out the side door, and made our way back down the street. The neighborhood was silent, not just silent, but dead silent, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. The house looked worse up close. The paint was peeling, the front door cracked open just enough to be creepy, and that faint orange light was still glowing in the window above. We should have turned back, and we almost did, but we didn't. We crept inside. The whole place smelled like mildew and dust, like something was rotting under the floorboard. We tiptoed through the front room, trying to hold back nervous giggles, until we heard it, a clink, metal on metal, and then footsteps. We rounded the corner into what used to be the kitchen, and that's when we saw him, a man, maybe mid-30s, standing over a portable burner. He had gloves on, goggles, and those glass jars filled with something. He looked up, and we froze, and he didn't say anything. He just lunged at us. We screamed and bolted back through the door, grabbing our boards and flying down the streets like our lives depended on it. Because looking back, it probably did. But that's when things got worse. We thought we lost him. We were about to sneak back into my house through the side, hide under the covers, pretend nothing happened. No one would ever know. But the man followed us, and he grabbed Em. She started kicking and screaming, and this part I'll never forget. She bit his hand hard. Our neighborhood dog started barking like crazy, and then porch lights flicked on, doors opened, people came out shouting, and my parents came running outside in panic. They were furious until they realized what had happened. The man tried to run, but it was too late. Between the dog, the neighbors, and eventually the cops, they got him. And not just him. Turns out the house was being used as a meth lab by a small group of criminals, and we'd walked straight right into it. The guy who chased us had been alone that night. If his bodies were there, I don't even want to think what could have happened to us. We were grounded for months, phones taken, no TV or sleepovers, just nothing. But you know what? That raid shut down the entire operation, and looking back at it, it was stupid, kinda reckless, but we accidentally uncovered something really dangerous, and we never looked at that house or Halloween the same way ever again. So, yeah, when you see a light in a place that's supposed to be empty, don't go check it out. It's probably not a ghost or Damon Salvatore or whatever you're into. It's probably something much, much worse. This story happened several years ago. Back then, I was just 8 years old. Some of the details are foggy, but I recently asked my dad to help me piece it all together. What he told me chilled me to the bones, not just because of what happened, but because of how close we came to being part of it. Back then, we had a neighboring family we were close to. They had twins around my age. Let's call them Tiffany and Max. The thing about their family, though, was that it was deeply dysfunctional. The parents fought all the time, and it wasn't the kind of mild arguments married couples have. This was serious. I'm talking loud screaming, things crashing, and glass breaking in the middle of the night. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of their mother sobbing through the walls, or their father shouting things no kid should ever hear. Still, we played together sometimes. The twins were sweet, even if a little timid. You could tell there was something heavy on their shoulders, something that made them act older and more mature. That Halloween, their mom came over to our house, knocking on the door in a rush, makeup smudged like she'd been crying. She asked my mom if the twins could come trick or treating with us. Said she couldn't take them herself, something about not feeling well. My dad was the one taking me that night, so mom agreed. The twins didn't say anything. Instead, they just stood there in their little costumes, barely holding their pumpkin buckets. We went out, and the night itself was quite normal. We got candies, got tricked by some neighbors, and showed off our costumes to other kids. Dad even pulled a few tricks on us, sending Tiffany into a frenzy, while her brother and I laughed out loud. After a while, we headed back to their place. Their church light was on, so my dad walked them up to the door and knocked. But there was nothing. He called out, and still no answer. I remember standing behind him with my mom, watching as he stepped closer and called out, "Hey, it's me. We've got the kids." The twins stood still on either side of him. Then the door creaked open, just a bit. Their dad stood there in the doorway, short, half-buttoned, forehead shiny with sweat, a fresh bruise blooming under one eye. There was something dark, though, something red, at the corner of his collar. And that's when something shifted in my dad, and he stepped between the twins and their father. "You okay, man?" he asked, real casual like, but I could hear the edge in his voice. The man didn't answer. He just looked at the twins and then at my dad. "Give me my kids," he said. He didn't ask, he actually demanded. My dad didn't move. "Hey, why don't we talk for a second?" And that's when the man started shouting, "They're my kids. You don't tell me what to do." I remember Tiffany started crying, and her brother clutched his bucket harder. And then something gave. The man's shoulder slumped, and he just said, almost under his breath, "She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't. She just wouldn't stop." And that's when my mom ran up and pulled the twins away, hurrying them back to our house. And then my dad followed the man inside. He didn't have to. He could have waited for the cops, but something in him told him not to leave the guy alone. According to my dad, the second he stepped into the house, he knew. The air was heavy, the hallway smelled like copper and something metallic, and in the kitchen, he saw her, Tiffany and Max's mother, lying face down, motionless, blood pooling beneath her. She'd been struck from behind. My dad says that his heart dropped. He knew right then and there he was standing in the same room as a man who just murdered his wife, and somehow he had to remain calm. He couldn't back off, so he talked and kept the man talking. And when the police arrived, red and blue lights spilling across our walls, they found him sitting on the couch, head in hands, my dad still waiting across the room like a statue. The man was arrested. Then Tiffany and Max stayed with us until their grandparents could come and get them. I remember Max wouldn't sleep that night, just sat on the bed, eyes wide open, like he thought his dad was going to come through the windows. We never saw them again after that. They moved away, I don't know where, but I hope they're okay now. I really do. But every Halloween since then, my dad tells the story again. How he knew something was off when he saw the bruises, the sweat, the blood. How he had to stand there and not show fear. And how close we all came to walking right into something we were meant to see. This story happened when I was 12. Halloween back then happened to fall on a Sunday. Normally, that would mean nothing more than trick or treating after church or attending a sermon in my Spider Man costume. But in the small, deeply religious town where I grew up, it sparked something more intense. A lot of the people in our community thought Halloween was evil, literally. Not just bad for kids' morals, but open a door for the devil, kinda evil. Some families even refused to celebrate Christmas, saying it had pagan roots. That's the kind of place this was. So when our church announced that it would be hosting a small Halloween festival with games, competitions, and treats for the kids, it caused a bit of an uproar. According to our pastor, this was the church making a compromise to keep up with the youth, a way to give us a safe alternative without endorsing anything demonic. But unfortunately, not everyone saw it that way. There was one woman in particular that made her feelings very clear. Let's call her Mary. Mary lived 2 houses down from mine, and I've known her my entire life. And trust me when I say, I have never met someone as committed to killing joy as this woman was. This was not your average Jesus freak. This was the kind of woman that made it her mission to put a frown on everyone's face. She worked as the church's accountant, which gave her just enough authority to boss people around and make sure everyone remained as miserable as she was. She wasn't married, she had no kids, no life outside of the church, and she was always alone. And to be honest, she had this kind of energy about her, like everything was somehow an insult to her personally. So when the church announced the Halloween party, Mary was the first person to speak up against it. She called it an invitation to the devil, said we were calling in darkness. Typical Mary stuffs. But what's strange is, she still showed up. The party itself was pretty simple: cheap DIY decorations that failed to scare even toddlers, some old church games repurposed with a Halloween twist, and a big table of snacks and sweets that different families had brought in. A couple of parents even made these little goodie bags ready to take home, with cookies and biscuits decorated for the occasion. Nothing was labeled, no one was really keeping track of who brought what. I remember feeling like I've gotten away with something just by being there. I'd won a few games and ended up with a prize, a small bag with 3 zombie cookies. They looked delicious, honestly, and their decoration was the most Halloween themed treat at that gathering. I remember holding them up to show a couple of my friends when out of nowhere this kid named Derek ran over and grabbed the bag right out of my hand. Now, Derek was the school bully, big for his age, always pushing people around, always stealing stuff just to be a jerk. He tore open the bag and shoved a cookie in his mouth before I could say a word. And then everything stopped. At first, I thought he was choking. His eyes went wide, and he made this sound, part scream, part cough. Then he started spitting blood. It was everywhere, running down his chin, on his Gojo costume, on the floor, and some even on me. My friends started shouting. Some adults rushed over. Derek was screaming, grabbing his mouth, and crying harder than I'd ever seen him. And that's when someone looked at the cookie he dropped. Inside it, embedded right in the middle of the half eaten dough, was a razor blade. Not a Halloween prop, it was a real metal razor, the kind you'd find in an old fashioned shaving kit. It had cut deep into his tongue. If he'd bitten down a bit harder, or if he'd swallowed, he could have died. The event ended right then and there. They stopped the music, tossed all of the food and candy, parents grabbed their kids and left in a hurry, and the pastor made some vague statement about temptation and spiritual warfare, and the whole thing was quietly buried. We never had another Halloween party at church after that, nor did we have any kind of fun gathering outside of the curriculum of worship, and no one was ever arrested. The sheriff came, looked around, and asked some questions, but there was no way to trace who brought that cookie. Everything had been tossed into the same table, and multiple people had brought similar bags of treats. There was no way to prove where it came from. At least, that's what the adults said. But my friends and I, we were sure we knew who it was. It was certainly Mary. She hated the party, said it was satanic, watched the whole thing from the corner of the room with her arms crossed like she couldn't wait for something to go wrong. And one of my friends swears they saw her walking past the street table earlier, holding a Ziploc bag containing the same zombie cookies I won. There was no proof though. We had nothing concrete, but we all felt it. You know how sometimes, even as a kid, you can just know stuffs? No, that was one of those times. She never faced any consequences, just went back to her office at the church the next day like nothing ever happened, still walking around with the same pinched expression, still treating people like they owed her something. Derek stopped stealing snacks after that. I guess having your mouth sliced open will do that to a person. But he didn't change much. He was still a bully, still a jerk, just a little more tamed. And me? Well, I never ate another cookie at church again. Every year, when Halloween rolls around, I think about that night. And I think about the blood, the screaming, the razor, and that warm, delicious looking homemade cookie. And I wonder, if Derek hadn't taken it from me, would I have been the one to bite down? When I was 19, I went to university in Burlington, Vermont. It was one of those college experiences where everyone you meet is an activist who loves hiking and has a stash of weed somewhere. It was everything a 19 years old could ever ask for. The nightlife was insane, but so were the outdoorsy activities, especially during the holidays. That Halloween, a few friends and I decided to skip the usual campus parties and head out to my buddy's parents' cabin for a bonfire. It was deep in the woods, way off the main road. We showed up with a couple of cases of beers, some cheap whiskey, and a little weed, pretty much everything we needed for a solid night. At first, everything was fun. Everyone was laughing, drinking, passing joints around the fire. But as the night wore on, the couples started pairing off, disappearing into the trees or just sitting around, wrapped up in each other. I was the only one single in the group, so I just sat there, half buzzed, scrolling through my phone and trying so hard not to text my ex. After a while, I decided to step away from the group to take a leak. I wandered a little off into the trees, far enough that I couldn't hear the music anymore. And that's when I saw her. Out of the corner of my eye, about a 50-yard away, was a figure standing between the trees. When I looked closer, I saw a girl, a beautiful blonde girl with an insane figure, wearing what looked like a wildcat costume. It was the kind of Halloween outfit guys my age fantasized about. You know the type. Too tight, it's almost bursting out, with fake cat ears and even a small tail swaying with each step she took. None of my friends had worn costumes, and I knew for a fact she didn't come with us. So I called out for her, asking if she was lost or maybe looking for something. But she didn't answer. She just looked at me for a second, long enough for my hormones to take over, and then turned and walked deeper into the woods. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was just that stupid 19 years old confidence, but I followed her. She led me further and further into the trees, into the light from our bonfire was just a flicker behind us. I remember the sound of my boots on the leaves, my breath fogging in the cold, and the sway of her hips just ahead of me. Eventually, we came to this old, abandoned cottage. The roof sagged in the middle, and the windows were boarded up. One of those places that looked like it's been empty for decades. She slept inside, and I followed, half expecting. I don't know what I was expecting exactly. And that's when everything went black. I felt something slam into the back of my head, hard. The words sprang, and I remember hitting the ground. There were voices, low murmurs. I caught glimpses, symbols painted on the walls, people moving around me, chanting maybe. I think there were 5 or maybe 6 of them, some men and some women. I remember being dragged, my clothes being ripped off, the rough bark of a tree against my back, and then nothing, nothing but a giant hole in my memory. When I woke up, it was daylight. My head was pounding, the sun was burning into my eyes, and I was completely naked. There was blood all over me, but it wasn't mine. It had that thick, coppery smell, and it was dry in some places, still tacky in others. I was tied to a tree with rope, my wrists raw from where I must have struggled. Lying in the leaves next to me was a small hunting knife. I used it to cut myself free and started walking. No idea where I was, just trees for miles, and it took me hours before I found a dirt road, and even longer before I saw another person, a farmer in an old pickup. He looked at me like I was a ghost when he stopped. I told him what happened, and he just said, "Son, you're nowhere near Vermont. You're in Pennsylvania, Allegheny Forest." 2 whole days had passed since that night. The police said it must have been the drugs that had blacked out and somehow wandered all that way. But that doesn't explain the blood. It doesn't explain the rope burns. If I'm being honest, it explains nothing at all. My friends all swore they hadn't seen anyone else in the forest. They said they thought I just went back to the campus and said they were all messed up from the alcohol and weed. They couldn't be bothered, to be honest. And to this day, I still have no answer to what happened. And this memory remains in my mind as the greatest mystery of my life. Halloween 2008. I was one of the many, many a-holes who dressed up as Heath Ledger's Joker. In many ways, it was a fantastic night, with so many other Batman characters running around. which led to a lot of fun interactions with strangers around the city. But then, at one point, I made the stupid decision to run through the alley alone on the way to the club and run into a way too drunk guy dressed as Batman. I thought it was going to be just another fun interaction, but as I was about to pass him, he grabbed me by the neck and slammed me up against the wall really hard. My head hit the bricks, luckily cushioned by the green wig, but the guy didn't let go, and he was squeezing my neck like he meant some serious damage. I can still remember the stench of beer on his breath, growling some drunken BS in my ear that I couldn't understand, while I tried to wrestle his hands off me. Unfortunately, I'm a weak guy, and this dude, he was jacked enough to keep me pinned pretty easily. Between the lack of blood to my brain and the amount of alcohol in that blood, I did something very stupid. I wrapped my arms around him and gasped out, "Harder, Daddy." Look, I'm not proud of myself. I panicked, and I know it could have easily made things worse. But luckily for me, the knucklehead reacted like I tried to bite his D off. He dropped me like a sack of brick, and I just about had enough presence of mind to duck before he tried to kick my head in. He missed me and slammed his foot into the wall and started yelling, and then he limped away down the alley with his dumb cape flapping behind him. I just kind of lay there for a moment, just waiting for the world to stop spinning, before a really nice group of ladies came by and helped me up and took me to the gay bar down the road. Honestly, that's not the worst Halloween ever, but it is the most dramatic and most dangerous one, so I figured, why not share this instead?